welcome to Asia Outlook. I'm Melody and I'm here to report the top stories from around Asia. Declaring a people's war to fight the coronavirus by mobilizing the force of the whole country, Chinese President Xi Jinping flew into Wuhan on Tuesday to inspect the epidemic prevention and control work on the ground. President Xi called the epicenter of the outbreak Wuhan a heroic city and its resident heroic people, adding they will be remembered in history for the final victory against the disease, and the whole party and nation are deeply moved by Wuhan people. Let's take a look. The global outbreak of the COVID-19 coronavirus has officially been declared as a pandemic by the World Health Organization.
WHO has been assessing this outbreak around the clock, and we're deeply concerned both by the alarming levels of spread and severity and by the alarming levels of inaction. We have therefore made the assessment that COVID-19 can be characterized as a pandemic. Pandemic is not a word to use lightly or carelessly. It's a word that, if misused, can cause unreasonable fear or unjustified acceptance that the fight is over, leading to unnecessary suffering and death. Describing the situation as a pandemic does not change WHO's assessment of the threat posed by the virus. It doesn't change what WHO is doing, and it doesn't change what countries should do.
China has sent a special medical team to Italy to assist with control efforts. It comes after China's foreign minister told his Italian counterpart that Beijing stood ready to help. The 7-member team, organized by the China Red Cross Society, includes 5 experts from the western province of Sichuan. They have brought important medical supplies.
We will mainly provide guidance work when we get there, especially for critical cases. The mortality rate in Italy is high, especially among the elderly. The medical system between China and Italy might be different, and our experience may not be entirely suitable for them. But when it comes to emergency treatment methods, there are commonalities.
We will first assess the situation when we get there, according to Red Cross standards. We'll also guide work for critical patients in the ICU. Since the outbreak happened, I already got my luggage ready. I did not make it as part of the batch sent to Wuhan, but I'm now more ready than ever to help.
Women have made remarkable progress when it comes to education, employment, and earnings. In Singapore, the employment rate of women has risen from 62% in 2002 to 78% in 2018. But they are still being paid less than their male counterparts doing the same job. Miro Liu has more from Singapore.
Women in Singapore earned 6% less than their male colleagues in 2018 for doing similar work in similar roles. The Adjusted Gender Pay Gap report released by Singapore's Ministry of Manpower took into account factors like education, age, and industry for their calculations. However, the unadjusted wage gap shows that the overall median monthly salary of a woman was 16.3% less than a man's, which is in fact higher than it was in 2002. Women's rights advocates believe that the unadjusted figure, which is widely recognized internationally, is a more accurate representation of the ground realities.
I think the larger number is probably more indicative of the reality on the ground, because the things that they adjust for almost normalized bias. And what the lower number doesn't do is it doesn't help us address that. It gives us a false sense of security. And we can only solve problems if we can identify them to begin with.
A crucial factor behind the pay gap is due to persistent gender norms and occupation segregation, whereby men tend to dominate higher paying jobs while women are overrepresented in the lower paying ones.
Why women might end up in lower paying roles has a lot to do with the fact that their role as the primary caregiver compels them to look for jobs that allow them the flexibility of balancing both. And these jobs usually would be part-time work or, kind of more flexible types of work that tends to pay lower as well.
Aware went on to add that shared caregiving responsibilities between both parents and additional paternity leave for fathers could help women better manage their dual roles. But undeniably, a more drastic change in mindset and workplace policies is vital to addressing the larger issue of pay disparity.
There's several things companies and countries can do. One is to encourage pay transparency. I think the more transparent wages are, the more likely we are to see an equalization for women. The second thing is blind hiring. You submit the same CV with a man's name and a woman's name, and the man gets selected, and it's exactly the same CV. So there is a lot of bias built into our system.
At the current rate, it will take women almost 100 years to earn as much as men, as per the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report 2020. Though voices are being raised and efforts are being made to bridge the gap, the time when equal pay is given for equal work, irrespective of gender, is still a far cry away. Mira Lu, CGTN, Singapore.
Saudi Arabia has said it would boost its oil supplies to a record high in April. Tuesday's announcement raised the stakes in a standoff with Russia and rebuffed Moscow's suggestion for new talks. The clash between the two sparked a 25% slump in crude prices on Monday. It triggered panic selling on Wall Street and other equity markets, which have already been badly hit by the coronavirus outbreak. Oil prices recovered some ground on Tuesday, jumping over 8%, but prices were still 40% down on the start of the year. Indonesia has reported its first fatality from the COVID-19. The country is dealing with 34 cases, one of which is suspected to be the result of local transmission. CGTN Silkina Aluwalia has more from Jakarta.
What we know about Indonesia's first death is that the British woman who passed away was known only as Case 25. She was on holiday in Bali. This woman already had underlying health issues, including diabetes, high blood pressure, and lung problems. Authorities say she was an imported case, which means that it was very unlikely that she contracted the disease in Indonesia itself. However, they did not release any information about where she arrived from. The health ministry has tracked down people that were in close contact with her. So far, they have found 21 people, and all of them are now urged to self-isolate at home. The woman's husband, who was with her on the trip, is also under close observation right now. Indonesia is now stepping up their efforts to contain this virus. The country is seeing a steady rise in cases per day, and one of them could possibly be a result of local transmission. And this is worrying because community transmissions could spread even faster and wider. So right now, the government's main priority is to reduce the risk of transmission locally. Silkina Aluwalia, CGTN, Jakarta.
Malaysia's new Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin announced his cabinet on Tuesday, with the Islamist Party, PAS, filling 3 ministerial posts. But several big names of UMNO, the party that ruled for 60 years and is once against the biggest party in government, have been excluded. CGTN Ryan Meltzer has more from Kuala Lumpur.
After no change of government in 60 years, Malaysia has now had 2 in less than 2 years. Muhyiddin Yassin's cabinet contains some familiar faces. defectors from the past Pakatan Harapan government, and remnants of the previous UMNO-led one. He has brought in a couple of technocrats to fill key roles such as finance minister, and he has excluded all those facing charges of corruption.
In simple terms, I want to create a cabinet that will give the best to the people. A cabinet that delivers.
Muhyiddin has had to try to keep all his new allies satisfied to ensure he has majority support when Parliament reconvenes in May.
This cabinet is one of survival because what you can see, the numbers of minister and deputy minister has gone up from 55 to 70. People should have very realistic expectations of this government. It's so bloated, it is built on political convenience.
Some will be relieved that the Islamist party PAS got just 3 minister posts, and none of them really key. In a first for Malaysia, Muhyiddin did not appoint anyone as deputy prime minister, usually considered the preferred successor.
It would have been a very difficult decision to choose from a deputy from any one of those parties. So I think he was trying to possibly avoid conflict, but also to assert his authority in the sense that he is prime minister and he does not necessarily need to make this kind of concession to his parties.
The incoming cabinet will struggle to ease the anger of supporters of the previous government, which was ousted by defections, not the ballot box. They also face enormous economic challenges from the fallout of the US-China trade war, the COVID-19 virus, and now the plunge in oil prices, with royalties from the state oil company a major contributor to the government's budget. Ryan Meltzer, CGTN, Kuala Lumpur.
This is Asia Outlook broadcasting from Myanmar International Radio. You can visit our website at miradio.com.mm. You can also listen to our radio programs live on the website. Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte has declared a lockdown of the capital Metro Manila after raising the maximum alert level in response to the coronavirus. The lockdown will cover 16 cities for a period of at least 30 days. All modes of domestic travel in and out of Metro Manila will be restricted. Duterte has signed a resolution that would allow the government to order a ban on public gatherings, close schools, and quarantine communities with suspected infections. A total of 53 cases have been confirmed in the Philippines, and 5 people have died from the virus. With WHO officially declaring the COVID-19 outbreak as pandemic, China now perhaps has the most knowledge and experience about the virus. Here are 5 things that China did to turn the situation around.
The experience that China has had needs to be shared. They knew what they needed to do. They knew how they had to protect themselves, how they could protect their families, and what they needed to do collectively to bring this under control.
The world has been fighting the COVID-19 outbreak for over a month now. And now, China perhaps has the most knowledge and experience about the virus. In the country, the number of new cases has dropped to less than 100 a day. But around the world, the new virus is still causing panic. We recently asked Facebook users how they felt about China's measures to contain the COVID-19 outbreak. And over 2/3 of the responders agreed with what China had done since the critical early days of the outbreak. So, here are the 5 things China did to turn the situation around. Number 1. Lockdown in 3 days. On January 23rd, the Chinese government ordered people in Wuhan, where the new coronavirus was first discovered, not to leave the city, effectively putting it on lockdown. It was a tough decision to make, of course, and China took it in less than 3 days after it became evident that human-to-human transmission had occurred. At the time, no one knew what the consequences would look like. You can see that the Hubei province is in the center of China, and Wuhan is a city of more than 14 million people. Keep in mind that Wuhan was quarantined just one day before the Chinese New Year's Eve, which fell on January 24th. That time coincides with Chunyun, the world's largest annual human migration, with 3 billion trips expected during that month as people returned home to celebrate the new year with their loved ones. So imagine what would have happened if China had not made that decision.
I suppose maybe people will misunderstanding the lockdown of Wuhan or something like that. But I should say it's definitely necessary to do that. If it is delayed for a couple of days, and that will cause much more spreading all over China as well as the world.
Number 2, emergency hospital in 10 days. China is known for China's speed, of course, but the country has outdone itself in times of crisis. Building a hospital in 10 days from scratch is no easy feat, but with almost every hospital in Wuhan flooded with patients and among surging numbers of new infections, there was only one option available, and that is to build more hospitals. It normally takes at least 6 to 8 months to construct a new hospital, and the first facility China built in Wuhan has 1,000 beds and 30 intensive care units. China mobilized military and medical staff from all over the country to help build and operate the hospital. So once again, the lesson learned here is speed is a top priority. Number 3. And here in Beijing, we have a very strict self-quarantine rule for 14 days. So what does it mean? Like if you have contact with people who travel from Hubei province, you will be quarantined for 14 days. And if you self-travel outside the city, you will be quarantined for 14 days. And if you share a room with people traveled outside the city, you will be quarantined for 14 days. And if your body temperature is over 37.3 degrees Celsius, you will be quarantined for 14 days. And if you have people nearby who are infected by the coronavirus, you will be quarantined for 14 days. But why 14 days? Because that is the exact time of the incubation period of coronavirus, and according to the scientists, of course. Number 4, control of daily activities. But even for those who decided not to travel and stay where they are, things weren't exactly easy either. Movie theaters, parks, museums, and art galleries were all closed, and only a handful of restaurants stayed open in the first few weeks of the outbreak. Business only operated in convenience stores and supermarkets, and even there, specific measures were in place. Like everywhere else, wearing a face mask was and still is a must. You also can't set foot inside any closed public space without having your body temperature taken at the door. And in certain neighborhoods, residents had to fill out a form with information about the places they visited, the place transport modes they've taken, and the people they talked with, basically everything. Number 5, working from home. Such an unprecedented epidemic can easily deal a heavy blow to China's economy. So to stop that from happening, we just cannot stay home and sort of doing nothing. People weren't just sitting at home, they were working from home. And they weren't just finishing their work online, they were also shopping, ordering food, and socializing without setting their foot outside the door. When facing hardship, different countries respond differently. During this emergency, China chose urgency. Everything the country did, it did with minimal time for the maximum effect. The new coronavirus is a global threat for all human beings. And at this stage, speed is the most important thing in prevention work. We know that precautions must be taken because life is just too precious to lose.
The director of the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention on Thursday said that some Americans who died of the flu might have been infected with coronavirus. Robert Redfield made the comments during a congressional hearing. The CDC estimates since October up to 49 million Americans that caught the flu and 52,000 have died. Redfield also said that the biggest overseas threat in the epidemic has shifted from China to Europe. He said a lack of federal funding has hampered the government's response to the crisis. Russia's lower house of parliament has passed constitutional changes regarding presidential terms. The amendment could see Vladimir Putin staying on as president even after his term limit expires in 2024, potentially until 2036. However, the bill must still pass the upper house later on Wednesday and a public vote planned for late April. Putin is currently serving his fourth presidential term. For more into Russia's constitution, political analysis, Fred Weir gives us his insight from Moscow.
Which would restructure the institutions of government, devolve power from the president to the parliament, change the ideological nature of the state, because the 1993 Constitution is a more liberal document, and the tenor of the Putin era is socially conservative. And this particular amendment, which would allow Putin to run again in 2024, is a late addition. It's almost a last-minute thing, which I suspect was occasioned by the sense of panic that's general in the world today over coronavirus. But in Russia, there's the oil war with Saudi Arabia, which is really a scary thing. A lot of things that seem to create a sense of chaos and uncertainty. And in Russia, Putin seems to be the guarantor of stability. The past 20 years have been good years in Russia. And Putin seems to take credit for that, and people want him to be around. It's hard for anybody, even for me, to imagine a Russia without Putin at this point. So I think that's why we had this amendment. It actually is in contradiction to the rest of the constitutional package, because why would Putin want to run again for president if his constitutional powers will be greatly diminished by the other amendments? Anyway, this is a state of play. It will pass through the third reading in Parliament within a day or two. It needs all the different points, especially this last one about him running again, have to be approved by the Constitutional Court. And then in April, in about a month, a little more than a month, there will be a public referendum, which one also expects will pass. And at that point, the Constitution will be rewritten.
In Pakistan, an F-16 fighter jet belonging to the country's Air Force has crashed in the capital, Islamabad. The aircraft fell during a rehearsal ahead of the Pakistan Day Parade, due to be held in late March. Rescue teams have been dispatched to the crash site, and an investigation has been launched into the cause of the crash. As the spring season arrives in Wuhan, the bitterly fought battle against COVID-19 is becoming a memory. Not all but one of the city's temporary hospitals have closed down, with recovering coronavirus patients being discharged and sent elsewhere. Families, doctors, and nurses alike are telling stories of victory. Let's take a look.
Over a month of intensive work now coming to a satisfactory conclusion. On Monday, Wuhan's International Conference and Exhibition Center, one of the city's earliest and largest temporary coronavirus hospitals, officially suspended its service.
我们也成为收治病人最多、出院病人最多的方舱医院，也实现了医护人员零感染、患者零死亡的目标。
The hospital was jointly run by 21 medical teams from all over China with 6 local medical institutions. And over the course of 34 days, it admitted 1,848 patients, 1,327 of whom have been discharged, with the rest transferred to designated hospitals.
就是方舱医院呢，对于公共应急卫生事件来讲，我们过去是没经历过的，所以一开始接手这个方舱医院，我们也不知道怎么去经营它。 但是，在 协和医院和他们这个团队共同管理这个方舱医院的时候，用了很多创新的一些管理措施。
Patients who are discharged are then sent to quarantine sites for another 2 weeks of medical observations. Many have a lot to say to the medical staff that have attended to them and their families.
他是危重病人，差点连命都没有的，是那个福建的那个医护人员，特别是要感谢的那个陈主任，他把我爸爸的命救回来了。
我们穿着白大褂，我们骄傲，我们胜利了。
The convention center turned hospital marks the 13th out of 14 temporary hospitals in Wuhan now closed. The last closure is slated for Tuesday.
The women's wheelchair basketball team was formed by the International Committee of the Red Cross in 2012 as a tool to rehabilitate and empower patients at a Kabul clinic in Afghanistan. More on this topic, CGTN Jack Barton reports.
Afghanistan's national women's wheelchair basketball team. The first squad was started as a rehabilitation tool for patients at the International Committee of the Red Cross's Kabul clinic in 2012. A dozen countrywide teams now compete, while the national women's and men's squads regularly attend tournaments abroad. Physical therapy and empowerment remain core to the sport, still supported by the Red Cross.
I have so many friends that before they were at home, they lost their self-confidence. They have no enough confidence, but now they are much different.
Team captain Niloufar Bayat was badly injured by a mortar that landed on her house when she was 3. There is also the indirect impact of conflict.
I was a little child, almost 3 years old, when my feet were paralyzed with polio due to not being vaccinated. It was war and no one could get a vaccine at that time.
There's no exact figure on how many people have been injured in the crossfire over the past 4 decades of conflict here in Afghanistan. But staff at the Red Cross's Orthopedic Center say they've treated about 190,000 people since they began operations in the country. In the wake of a deal with the US, the Taliban has agreed to hold peace talks with the Afghan government. What a compromise might look like with the militants is a real concern for many women in Afghanistan, including these athletes.
I'm pessimistic about the restrictions that they want. They have said that they don't like women doing music or sports or anything like that. They didn't even do interview with female journalists. So it's really frustrating.
If a woman is banned from getting an education, society won't progress. Their children will be raised illiterate. Their children won't be open-minded. If a society has educated mothers and knows the value of education, the mothers will help their children with education. So women have an important role.
We all Afghans. All the bad memories I have in my whole life till now is from the time Taliban were in Afghanistan. They changed my life, they changed even my future, they changed my wishes. They are the reason that I got injured. I became disabled forever.
There's no sense of fatalism and certainly no mood for compromise or rolling back hard-fought-for gains in what is still a deeply conservative country. And when it comes to turning words into powerful action, these women have already won a decisive victory in their struggle for a more inclusive Afghanistan that will no doubt continue even if the guns fall silent. Jack Barton, CGTN, Kabul.
South Korea on Thursday reported 114 new cases of the coronavirus and 6 more deaths. Residents continue to line up to buy face masks. CGTN Joseph Kim has more from Seoul.
All across the country, South Koreans are standing in queues for the chance to buy face masks. They're in high demand because of the coronavirus outbreak here, as South Korea has one of the highest number of infections outside China. So much so that the nation has faced severe shortages of face masks, which has forced the government to take full control of supply, including introducing an export ban on masks, as well as implementing a new rationing system this week. Under the new system, citizens will only be able to buy 2 masks per week at pharmacies like this one on certain designated days. South Korea says that it's currently producing about 10 million masks a day following emergency measures. And the goal now is to allow even distribution of masks as the government cracks down on hoarding and works to alleviate fears and further contain the spread of the infectious disease.
And that's all we have for today's Asia Outlook on MI Radio. Thank you for being with us. We'll be back next week. Until next time.